Today I need to pick up a little bit of where I hoped to get last week but didn't, before we dive into the first judge. And so I've entitled this first half of the lesson, Geographic Details and Why They Matter. And, we tend to just skip over the geography, the place names in the Bible, or the geographic things it talks about. And it turns out that, a lot of that information is there for a reason. If you think about it, writing in ancient times, when scribes were writing various texts, the medium upon which you write, the scroll or the tablet or whatever it is scarce and expensive. And so as a result, the information that you decide that you're going to include in a particular story, something you're writing, tends to be important. You don't put a lot of fluffy details because the medium is expensive. Okay? And so I want to look at a few things that we see in chapter 1 that give us some really interesting geographic details that we might just skip on over and see what they tell us about what's happening in Israel's entering the Promised Land and what's going to happen because of how they've entered the Promised Land. Okay? So, the first one I want to look at is a little bit of a fun one. This is from Judges chapter 1, 11 through 15. And I've opted just to translate this myself because I didn't like the way that the translations handle a particular word or two that kind of obscures what's going on. So, and it says, this is after Judah has gone up first. Remember that they inquire of the Lord, and he says, Judah shall go up, and Judah says to the tribe of Simeon, hey, if y'all help us, we'll help you. And so they all go up together. And so it says, and they, Judah, or probably Judah and Simeon, went from there against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly Kiriath Sefer, which in Hebrew is Scroll Town. Okay? And Caleb said, whoever attacks Kiriath Sefer and takes it, I will give to him my daughter Achsah as wife. And Othniel, son of Kranz, younger brother of Caleb, took it. And he, that is Caleb, gave to him Achsah, his daughter. And coming to him, she urged him, that is Othniel, to ask from her father for a field. And it says, and she pounded down from atop her donkey. And Caleb said to her, what's with you? And she said to him, give me a blessing because you have put me in the land of the Negev. Give me water pools. Caleb gave her the upper and the lower pools. Okay? So first thing, this is a little bit fun. The names. Kiriath Sefer means scroll town. Okay? Town of the scrolls. Town of the books. And Debir seems to come from a Hebrew word, davar, which means words. Okay? So it's kind of like Israel has changed the noun from scroll town to words. Okay? Or word. So there's a little bit of a name play there. But the thing I want to focus on is, so their area is in the south, in the Negev. Negev in Hebrew means south, but it also has another indication. Does anyone know what that is? It's dry. Yeah, bone dry. And so, Achsah has basically been sold off as a prize to her cousin to be his wife, and which was not uncommon. And she recognizes immediately that they're going to have a problem with where they're living. And what's the problem? No water. All right. So anyway, so she gets on her donkey, and what I really like is, I don't know, your translations might say she dismounted from her donkey, but the word that's used there is kind of a fun word that isn't used very often in Hebrew. That kind of means she pounded down. She got off her donkey kind of in a huff. Okay? And goes up to her father, and he greets her with a greeting that is, in Hebrew, it's malech, which is kind of, it could be what's up, or it could be what's with you, right? And kind of the fact that he sees her kind of angrily stomping towards him from off her donkey, and she says, give me a blessing because you have put me in the land of the Negev. You've put me in a dry land. And what does she ask for? Yeah, she asked for water pools. Now, it's a curious, the word is, your translations might say, they may choose not to translate it. They might call it gulot. Okay? Gulot is a water pool in Hebrew. And it's again, it's a little bit, it could be a basin of water, but it seems to imply, give me some places where there are some springs of water that form into pools so that we can live in this dry land. Okay? And so he gives her the upper and the lower pools. Now, which upper and lower pools those are, we don't know. But your translation might say the upper gulot and the lower gulot. It's really the upper water pool and the lower water pool. So he acquiesces to his daughter and he gives her these water pools. So what this shows us is a couple things. One is the land that Judah has in the south and the Negev is not great land. It's good land for shepherding. But to shepherd, you also need access to water. Okay? And water is a scarce resource. There are no major rivers in Israel. There's no flooding rivers like there are in Egypt or like there are in Mesopotamia. It is a rain-dependent land. And so access to water is key to life. And so Achsah recognizes this and says to her husband, or to her father basically, give me a dowry. Give me a dowry that's going to be water, because that's what we're going to need to live here. Any questions about that? Again, it's an odd story. It just kind of pops up out of nowhere, but it has a significant meaning for what it means to live in the land. Yes, sir?
Why do you think they repeated the same stories in Joshua?
Say that again?
Why do you think they repeated this story in Judges with the same stories?
Yes, sure. And what's interesting is it is word for word. That's a really good question. I think we're going to get the answer in about 10 minutes. Okay? But it's an important detail. This is one of those stories that is literally copied verbatim from what we have in Joshua. Now, I'm not going to tell you which one came first, but to say that whoever's writing these knows one of them and takes the story and lifts it directly word for word. Okay? No discrepancies whatsoever. Okay? Great. So now, we get to, remember we talked about how Judges 1 just kind of reports the facts of what's happening in these battles. And so it kind of walks through some of the tribes. So it starts with Judah, which is in the south. You can see on the map there. Judah's in the south. Simeon is completely surrounded by Judah. And so now we're going to move a little further north up to the tribe of Manasseh. And you'll notice Manasseh is in two pieces. You've got the piece that basically is to the west of the Jordan, and you have another piece that is east of the Jordan. Okay? And this part of Manasseh is really dealing with the ones that are west of the Jordan in what is today Israel. And it says, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beit Sham and its villages, or Ta'anach and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Iblim and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages. But the Canaanites continued to live in that land. When Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not in fact drive them out. Now, we read that list as just a bunch of names. Okay? Kind of a fun fact. Neither here nor there. When it says, literally in Hebrew, it says, each of these towns and its daughters. Okay? Basically meaning the surrounding villages and communities that depend on that town, that fortified town. Okay? So you've got these sort of collections, and basically, I've highlighted a few of them here. You can see there's Dor, Megiddo, Ta'anach, Yivlin, and Beit Shan. So they're all kind of clustered up in this same area. And so my question is, what can we learn from this list of cities? Well, Dor sits on the Mediterranean. Okay? And so it is a coastal town. One of a very few coastal towns in Israel, actually. What else? Well, let's take a little closer look. Here we have Beit Shan and Megiddo and Ta'anach and Yivlin. And what we have in the middle, it's a little bit hard to see. I don't know if my pointer get, yeah. So do you see here here's the Sea of Galilee. Here's the Jordan River coming down, okay? And you'll notice this darkness here, right? The darker, the way this map works, the darker the color, the lower the elevation.
It's the valleys.
Yes, Sea of Galilee sits at 400 feet below sea level. Okay? And guess what? The Jordan runs downhill from there to the Dead Sea, which sits at about 1,200 feet below sea level, lowest place on the face of the earth. Well, here we have, also you'll notice, if I can get this, we have this dark that kind of runs up this way. And you'll notice how that dark kind of forms this sort of arrowhead here. Some say it's a bird, some say it's kind of an arrowhead shape. Do you see that? Okay. Well, what do we have here at this low point in the Jordan River and this low point that goes into this valley? We have the town of Beit Shan. Well, this valley, right here, this arrow-shaped valley, is called the Jezreel Valley. Lots of stuff happens in the Bible in the Jezreel Valley. Why? Well, these red lines represent roads, ancient roads. And what you have here, you see how this one is particularly dark? That is the main highway that on this side, over here by the ocean, is called the Way of the Sea, I think is how the Egyptians call it. The Romans call it the Via Maris, okay, the sea road. And then on this side, it's off the map here, but over here on the screen is a desert road, often called the King's Highway, that runs on the other side. And so up north of the Sea of Galilee, up by Damascus, you have these main roads that converge. And so if you're going to Egypt from Babylon, your only options are to come through this way. That's the road. And when you get to the Jezreel Valley, you have a few entrance points. You have an entrance point up here. This, by the way, is the Nazareth Ridge on this sort of northern edge here. You have the road coming through here. There's a pass there that you can go through. There's a pass here from Beit Shan. There is a pass that comes down through here. This is, I believe Jezreel is right there, the town, or some, I believe. And it comes through to Yivlin. There's another pass at Ta'anach. And there's a major pass at Megiddo, okay, that connects to this highway. And so what you have in each of these instances is you have a focal point for travel. And as a result, you have fortress cities that have been there for ages and ages. Yes, sir.
There's a particular place, and I don't know if it's the Jezreel Valley, that, if I recall, there was something that was repeated a number of times in the Old Testament that said that battles were fought there because the plain was flat there.
Yes. So yeah, so this entire valley is flat. It's actually got one little ridge in the middle of it, but other than that, it is flat. And in effect, what you have is, you have in the ancient world, you have nature's traffic circle. Okay? Traffic comes through here, and you can go to the ports here. You can go up to Phoenicia, going up this road here to Tyre and Sidon. You can go down this way to Egypt. You can cut across and up through Gilead to the other highway. It is a natural place for travel to circulate. This is the economic hub of the land of Israel. And each of these cities controls a major choke point through that travel. And if you have a choke point, what can you do? Collect tolls, collect taxes, okay? You control trade. And what does it say about Manasseh? Did they take any of them? They didn't take a single one. Not a single one. Randy, you got a finger on your...
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that high area, including those cities, isn't that what ultimately became Samaria?
Samaria is... you mean Samaria of the New Testament?
Yes.
Okay. Samaria of the New Testament technically is in this area right here. Okay? Not so much the Jezreel Valley in and of itself. It's a little bit further south in the hills. Okay? But this is, so this is key. Incidentally, when Saul and Jonathan are killed by the Philistines, where do they hang them? On the walls of Beit Shan, right here. The battle takes place between Mount Gilboa on one side, and what's the other mountain on the other? I totally went out of my head at the moment. This is Mount Gilboa right here. Okay? So what are they battling with the Philistines over? Control of this trade pass in the Jezreel Valley. The cities are important. Well, let's go on. And Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer, but the Canaanites lived among them in Gezer. And then, a few verses later, it says, the Amorites pressed the Danites back into the hill country. They did not allow them to come down to the plain. The Amorites continued to live in Har-Heres, and in Ayalon, and in Shaalvim. But the hand of the house of Joseph rested heavily on them, and they became subject to forced labor. So now we've moved down the country into more the middle. And you can see where Jerusalem is, right here. And then you have Ayalon, Shaalvim, and Gezer. Har-Heres, no clue where that is. It means Harris Hill or Harris Mount. But what can we learn from these cities? Well, if we look a little closer, and again, it's a little bit hard to see. You can see here's Jericho, here's the Dead Sea, and the Jordan River coming down into the Dead Sea. You'll notice how dark that is, right? This is 1,200 feet below sea level. Okay? And then you see that it gets very light. So this is about, Jerusalem sits at an elevation of about 2,500 feet above sea level. So to go from Jericho to Jerusalem is about 3,600, 3,700 feet of elevation rise over about 4 or 5 miles, maybe 6 miles. It's pretty steep up. And then the ridge goes down the other way, and you have the coastal plain over here, which is where that highway runs. And you have this sort of low hill country, rolling hills that's called the Shephelah. And to get from this lower area up to, let's say, the hill country up here, you have to pass the Shephelah, and there are certain passes, certain ridge routes that give you the best way to get up to Jerusalem. And it just turns out that Ayalon is at the beginning of one of those passes. And in fact, today it is called the Ayalon Pass. And the main highway from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem goes right up the Ayalon Pass, just like it has for thousands of years. Gezer sits, again, on the borderline between the coastal plain and these passes that run up to the hill country, as does Sha'alim. So, Ephraim and Dan cannot guard, cannot take the guard posts, the cities that control trade, over the Central Valley either, the Central Hills either. Because to go from the highway, if you wanted to, let's say, go up to Moab and Ammon, which are over here, you would go from here to Gezer, up to Ayalon, probably pass around Jerusalem, and then down to Jericho. So they don't take it. They can't control the trade. Yes, ma'am.
Did they not take them because they couldn't take them physically? Or they wanted the riches that were within those cities to probably share with them?
The text seems to indicate they couldn't take them. And in fact, the only way that Israel ever gets the town of Gezer, does anybody know this story? Solomon marries the daughter of, what's the very first thing it tells us about Solomon when he becomes king? He marries the daughter of Pharaoh. And as a dowry, Pharaoh comes in and conquers Gezer and gives it to his daughter. That's the only way Israel ever gets control of Gezer. They're never able to take it. Another, we talk about Megiddo, okay, earlier in the Jezreel Valley, another Pharaoh, and I can't remember which one it is, we have in his annals, he says, taking Megiddo is like taking 1,000 cities. It was that well defended. They could not take them. They weren't able. Correct.
Can you go back to the scripture you read?
Yes.
Yeah. But the hand of the house of Joseph
Yes.
stayed heavily on them, and they became subject to forced slavery. And the closest to Joseph is Ephraim.
Closest to Ephraim is part of the house of Joseph.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so Ephraimites eventually had influence enough to enslave
Correct.
those towns.
Well, they enslaved the people, but they didn't take the towns.
Right, okay.
So that, in other words, they probably took the people in the villages surrounding as slaves, but they weren't able to fully take it. Does that make sense?
It's interesting that although Ephraim's been doing everything it needed to do in the north, it was able to get influence on those towns within.
That aren't even in their territory. Yes.
What?
That aren't even technically in their territory.
Right.
Yes. And by the way, we'll look at this later on, towards the end of the book. Notice the area that Dan has that's been assigned to them. We'll see where Dan ends up. Okay? So, yes.
Do you think the history of the Old Testament would have been different had they taken those towns? I guess I'm wondering if God told them to take the towns when they moved into this area, I think to give them an identity and to keep them pure for Him. And if they didn't do that, then this is probably one of the consequences.
So that's a good thought, but now hold on for a minute, because we're going to see, keep that thought in your head as we get to something coming up.
Okay.
So, but what I want to say, so what I kind of want to summarize is when we think about geographical implications, right? The Israelites failed to control strategic commercial and military outposts. Okay? Commercial and military, the same thing. Okay, same outposts. They don't get the Jezreel Valley, they don't take the coastal ports, and they don't control the Shephelah. Okay? Now, they're confined to the hill country, sort of the hilly area that runs between, okay? And to the southern wilderness, areas off the main trade routes. They're vulnerable. And their lack of success virtually guarantees that there is going to be conflict with their neighbors. That's what all those names tell us. So, here's a question. How do we distinguish between theological and economic factors in the Bible? Because the text is going to tell us, it's going to give us several different versions, but one version is Israel is idolatrous, and therefore God handed them over to their neighbors, right? The people around them, and they were oppressed. Yet when we look at what it tells us of these economic factors, there's other stuff going on. So how do we distinguish between the theological and the economic? Jim, and then I saw your hand first, and then Alma.
So I read years ago that talked about the geography of Israel. It talked about how because of the rains that came and wouldn't come, that made the people. It was a book that was trying to explain without believers about why the people became the Jews. It said that because they had the rain, they had to depend upon God for the rain. That made them very much shake their whole religion and thoughts going forward.
Okay. All right. Alma?
Well, I think you used the term in there, there's didn't, couldn't, wouldn't is never really used.
Correct.
But I think the thing we have to acknowledge is that God says, I have given you the land. And then it says, when it was, when Ephraim didn't take, it said they didn't take. It wasn't that they couldn't, because with God, they could have. Because he said, I've given you the land.
Yeah, so I want you to, keep that thought percolating, because this is a real question that you could almost argue it's a theological question too, is God said he's giving them the land. Well, why can't they take it?
Why don't they take it?
It says they did take it.
Okay.
They did everything Moses told them to do.
So we also get that they did take it, they didn't take it, they could take it, they couldn't take it. There's this tension, and I think it's meant to be wrestled with. It's there for us to wrestle with it a bit. But I want us to go one step further, because I think this is important even for us today. Okay? Here we have the beginning of Judges chapter 3. And he says, now these are the nations that the Lord left to test all those in Israel who had no experience of any war in Canaan. It was only that successive generations of Israelites might know war, to teach those who had no experience of it before. The 5 lords of the Philistines and all the Canaanites, the Sidonians and the Hivites who lived on Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon as far as Lebo Hamath, they were for the testing of Israel to know whether Israel would obey the commandments of the Lord which he commanded their ancestors by Moses. So the Israelites lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and they took their daughters as wives for themselves, and their own daughters they gave to their sons, and they worshipped other gods. Now, here's my question. Why are these nations left in the promised land according to this passage?
The passage is so that Israel would learn to continue how to fight to keep themselves as a nation. But I don't think that's what God did. I think it was a premonition of what was coming thousands of years later.
Okay. Let's parse that a little bit.
So, that Jesus is the light to the entire world, including Gentiles and the unsaved. And so, even though we had this group of Hebrews Israelites that are supposed to be pure and kept, and from which Jesus will come, I think God's already planned the coursework for saying, but you're not the plan for the rest of the generations. We're setting up the long-term plan here.
Okay.
I think he was setting up a test as to how faithful they would be. If they were faithful to him, they would not be subject to these people in a way where they could overrun them and enforce them. And so therefore, the Jews decided that it was kind of easier to live among the others and to coexist and to commingle with the people around them in place of keeping themselves pure unto the Lord.
Okay. So here we get a question of who is allowing these people to stay in the land? Is it because the Israelites didn't listen to God and therefore couldn't drive them out? Or is it that God left them there for a very specific purpose?
The second one, right? He's proving to Israelite, you will not be faithful. You need something greater.
Or is he saying, you need to learn how to fight, and I'm going to leave these people here so you've got somebody you're going to fight against? Which is kind of what this text says.
That's what it says.
Okay, so my point is, so here's my point. I'm not disagreeing with you.
I'm sorry, I was just saying that is the perspective of the writer, because he doesn't know better.
Okay, fair enough. Well, let's just presume that at this point the writer does know better. Okay. Only because, and I've said this before, right? As much of a Christian as I am, okay, and as much as I am so grateful and thankful for what God has done through Jesus, let's not try to go find Jesus under every rock in the Old Testament. Let's take the text for what it says about itself, right? And I'm not disagreeing with your interpretation. I'm just saying that's reading a lot into a text that might say something very different.
Because I got the end of the book.
You've read the end of the story, yeah. Now, there's a whole lot of Jews who would probably disagree with you on that, but that's okay, right? I'm saying this text seems to say God left them there on purpose to train them how to fight, because bigger enemies are coming. Now, it also will say some other reasons why, right? My point is, let's look at the reasons and say it doesn't give us simply one reason. It's going to give us multiple reasons of why these people are here. Okay? And this is one of them. And so now then, we get this little interesting statement. It says, so the Israelites lived among these people, okay? The Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, Jebusites, so on and so forth. And they took their daughters as wives for themselves, and their own daughters they gave to their sons. And my question is, why intermarry?
You go along to get along.
Okay. What is marriage used for in the ancient world?
Property.
Trees.
Did I heard another?
Gain land. Gain land.
Gain land, treaties, economic security. You watch my back, I'll watch yours, and therefore, hey, you've got a son, I've got a daughter. Let's seal the deal.
Religion was on the bottom of all that.
Okay. This is not a matter of all these kids were living together and they all fell in love and and that's what happened, right? Marriage in the ancient world has a purpose.
An alliance.
Political and economic survival. And what did we see with all those cities that they didn't take? The next thing they're doing to ensure their survival and their economic success is they're making treaties with all of their neighbors around them, and they're doing it by marrying their kids. Now, and it says, and they worshiped their gods. And I think the point in all this is that economic decisions have theological consequences. What you do for your own personal survival, your own personal success and wealth, has theological consequences. And it had it then, and guess what? It has it today. It has it today. what I think we're going to see is that what the writers do, especially that the theological writer, the theological voice that we're going to see in this book, that's going to come up in just a second, is that that theological voice is looking at, here's the outcome of what these decisions had for them. And so then we look at the very first judge, and he's a short one. Othniel. Now remember the judges cycle, right? We looked at this in the first week. It's Israel goes into idolatry, then God gives them over to their enemies, the people suffer and cry out to God. God raises up a judge to deliver them, that enemy is defeated, the land has peaceful rest, then the judge dies, and then the cycle starts all over again. And as we will see as we go through, it's not just going like this, it's a snowball going down a hill, getting bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes. So, here's what it says about Othniel. The Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, forgetting the Lord their God and worshiping the Baals and the Asherahs. Therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim of Aram Naharaim. And the Israelites served Cushan-Rishathaim for 8 years. But when the Israelites cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the Israelites who delivered them, Othniel, son of Kranz, Caleb's younger brother. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel. He went out to war, and the Lord gave King Cushan-Rishathaim of Aram into his hand, and he prevailed over Cushan-Rishathaim. So the land had rest 40 years. Then Othniel, son of Kranz. Now, let's talk about some people and places. Othniel, son of Kranz, Caleb's son. Where have we seen him before?
He just married the daughter.
He just married Aksa, right? Yes. And so, Jim, you asked the question, why in the world is this story repeated in Judges? Because it was already told to us in Joshua. I think it's setting the stage for having it here. Okay? He's a judge from the south. Remember, we asked the question last week whether or not the book of Judges has a bias towards the southern parts of Israel versus the north, what would later be the kingdom of Judah versus the kingdom of Israel. The meaning of the name Othniel, again, names and places have important meanings, and it means God or El is my protection, or some say it could mean God, El is my strength. I think protection is probably the more accurate. And then we have this place name, where this enemy comes from. Aram Naharaim, which literally means Aram of the two rivers. Anytime you see it, Hebrew has, it distinguishes between singular nouns, plural nouns, and it has a special case for twos, doubles. And so, whenever you see AIM on the end of a word, it's the double. Or it might be TIAM, depending on the verb, depending on the noun. So, Aram of Nahar is river, so Naharaim is two rivers. And two rivers is the way in Hebrew that you say Mesopotamia. Okay? So it's Aram of Mesopotamia, which, on the map, if we look here, this is Mesopotamia. The Tigris and Euphrates are the two rivers. So this area, this Fertile Crescent, is the area that we're talking about. And we don't exactly know where Aram of the two rivers is. Aram is kind of a catch-all sort of a term. But we think it's probably up in this area, quite a ways away from what we were looking at earlier, which shows this influence of trying to reach in and control this land bridge that is the land of Israel. So now we have King Cushan-Rishathaim. Notice anything about the ending of his name? Oh, it's a two something. In English we have a couple of, right? It's the same thing in Israel, so it's two somethings, double somethings. It turns out Rasha in Hebrew means wicked or evil. So he is King Cushan double evil. Okay, or doubly wicked Cushan. Okay? Now here's the thing. This is probably not his real name. What it is, and we see this all over the Hebrew Bible, it is a common literary device in the Old Testament to take a person's name, an enemy's name, and twist it slightly to make it something bad. It's designed to mock their enemies.
Kind of like a badass.
Kinda, yeah, that's a very good way to put it. A doubly. So yeah, that's kind of the thing, right? He's big evil, right? We see this literary device all over the place. One of Saul's sons is called Ishbosheth. That's not his name. That means son of shame. Okay? His real name is Ishbaal. Okay? Man of Baal, not man of shame. All over the place we see it. And my favorite, I won't tell you exactly what it means because it's crude. Jezebel's name is not Jezebel. In Hebrew, Jezebel means where's the very bad word for poop. Okay? It's a play on her name to denigrate her. Okay? Same thing is happening here. So, my question is, where do we see the judges cycle in this text? Where do you see it?
No, it's easy. They did evil. They forgot God. And then the anger came in. He sold it into the hands. And then they cried out to him. And he raised the deliverer. And then the land had rest. So, yeah.
It's a model. It's an exact perfect match. Okay? The cycle fits perfectly. There's no discrepancy. It's point to the fact, blah, 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 blah. Everything fits. Okay? The land had rest 40 years. What does 40 signify? A generation. It's the ideal number. Okay? The land had rest for 40 years, meaning that generation continued after this happened. They learned their lesson. They served Yahweh. Okay. So, the first judge in the book sets the standard. And incidentally, he's a judge from Judah. Okay? Othniel is the perfect model of the cycle. God is my protection. And all the other judges and all the other cycles can be measured against this standard. Okay? So the book starts out with, here's the perfect model, and we're going to go from there. Did I see a question? Did I see a hand? Okay, so geographic details give us important information. Let's not overlook them. Israel's military failures set up guaranteed conflict with their neighboring people groups, and economic and political decisions have theological consequences, even today. And Othniel and his cycle established a pattern for all the remaining judges that we will measure them against. And Othniel, God is my protection, is the model judge from which all the others are going to be compared. So, for next week, yes, sir.
One other thing I think that I thought you were going to touch on it when you spoke about the kings of Iran. The land that was originally given to Israel extended all the way over to the Euphrates.
To the river, yes.
And so one might say that had they been obedient and taken all of the land, that would include modern day Iraq, part of Jordan.
Syria, Lebanon, Phoenicia, all of it. Yeah. And that's the question, Israel never, the closest they ever come is under Solomon to getting the full land. But even then they don't get it. And even under Solomon, it's kind of not considered a good thing. They never get the full breadth of the land that is promised throughout. But yeah, you're right. It would extend over that far. Yeah. For next week, we're going to look at the story of Ehud. This is a fun one. And so read Judges 3, chapter 3, verses 12 through 31. And ask yourself, who is the enemy that Yahweh raises up? What is his name? What does it mean? Which city does he reside? That's kind of a curious detail that may raise some questions. And how long does the land have rest? Okay. Thank you all very much for your comments.